Thank you very much, everyone, for coming this evening. I would ask you that you stay with mute on for the time being if you're not speaking, which we are asking you to put questions in the chat as we go along. We'll start with a little bit of talking with Dave, have him introduce himself. I'll ask some questions and then we'll get on to the rest of the audience questions. Feel free to put whatever in the chat to ask questions as we go along. And as you noted, this session is being recorded. I will send you the link later so you can view it later at your leisure. So we'll start tonight and give a welcome to our speaker. Dave Liu is Pennsylvania Delta, class of 1993. He currently serves on the Trust Advisory Committee. So I'll just let Dave talk a little bit about his background in finance and engineering to start with.
Thanks, Tricia. Thanks so much for having me here today. And I'm really excited to be able to share my story and tell you a little bit about this project that I'm working on. So I actually was born in the US, but I grew up in Asia. So I grew up in Hong Kong. Then I came back to the US to study. I went to the University of Pennsylvania. And originally I was a freshman math major in the liberal arts school. And unfortunately, my family ran into some pretty tough financial challenges. And so I decided that I really needed to make sure that I was highly employable after graduating from Penn. And so I looked around and there was a dual degree program at Penn where you could study both engineering and business. And so I applied and I transferred into that program. And it was really no more than that. I think a lot of people have, a much more strategic, way of thinking about the education and the career that they go into. And unfortunately for me, desperate times called for desperate measures. And so I really was motivated by fear and a desire to make sure that I could take care of myself and my family. And I wanted to make sure that I could pursue a career that would give me the most options. And so that's how I started in my path towards studying engineering and studying business. And I did the full engineering degree at the University of Pennsylvania, largely because I wasn't really sure until around junior year what kind of career I wanted to have, whether it would be an engineering job, whether it be a Wall Street job, a management consulting job, or a product job. I really didn't know. And it was really a experience working at Goldman Sachs in my junior year that I realized that, kind of two things. One was that this was a career that would be highly lucrative if I went into Wall Street. There was clearly, a lot of opportunity, and if you were motivated, you could, get exposure to senior people pretty quickly. And second, I realized I was pretty good at it. I realized that, I had a lot of the knack for finance, and I think I could be a pretty good junior person on Wall Street. And so when I graduated from Penn, had a lot of options, but ultimately I decided to go into investment banking. And frankly, I didn't do a lot of due diligence. I probably should have, but I ultimately joined a firm called Jefferies and Company, and it was really small and really a fledgling investment bank. At the time I joined, there were really only 20 bankers, and the firm had less than 200 employees. And if there was a nationwide ranking of investment banks, I'm sure Jefferies was, 1,000 or lower when I joined. But they did a great marketing job on me. I was committed to go to Wall Street and work in New York, and I wasn't really a big fan of New York. But Jefferies was actually based in Los Angeles. So when they flew me out for recruiting and for sell day and interviewing, I fell in love with California, and I decided that if I was going to do investment banking, this felt like a pretty good firm to do it, and I could live in Los Angeles. Of course, that was a bait and switch. For the next 5 years, I didn't see daylight and was working in the office the whole time. But that's really how my career started on Wall Street. And I know we'll talk a little bit more about kind of some of the things I did to rise the corporate ladder. But I was blessed. I joined the firm as a junior person. I like to joke that I joined as the janitor, the entry level. And then I stayed there for almost 25 years. I rose pretty quickly, got promoted at every level, and then ultimately became managing director and co-head of the Internet and Digital Media Group. And I was really one of the only senior bankers and senior people of color for a long time at the firm. And so, I think that there was a lot I learned along the way that, I'm hopeful to share with others. And then I retired from my stint on Wall Street, and I decided that I wanted to try being an entrepreneur. I had, during the time I was an investment banker, had the opportunity to live and work in Silicon Valley, and was here really at the beginnings of the first .com era, Web 1.0, if you will, and had an opportunity to see and work with so many amazing companies as essentially their Sherpa, helping them realize their dreams, and helping entrepreneurs build their companies by helping them raise capital and help with acquisitions. And when I left Wall Street, I really wanted to see if I could be the bride, because I'd always been the bridesmaid. And so I started to explore lots of different options. And ultimately, fast forward, I ended up starting 4 companies, one in technology, one in asset management, one in media, and one in merchant banking. And so had my fill of starting a company from zero and building it and hiring people and going through that whole journey. And now today, I'm still a startup guy. I still work on a lot of different companies. I am also an active investor in a variety of companies. My investment philosophy is a little different than most, where I really try to invest and partner with entrepreneurs where in many ways I'm their right-hand person. So I look for situations where I can really be value add, not just from a advisory, but also operations, strategy, and even a little therapy. It's tough being an entrepreneur, as I know. And so just someone to talk to, a kindred spirit when things are really challenging, I find is really useful, and certainly helped me when I had that small circle of people that I could call when things were challenging. And so I've been blessed to have, experienced so far my 30-year career, both the role of Wall Street banker, the role of entrepreneur, and the role of investor and board member. And now, I'm embarking upon, the next stage with a few other more creative projects that I've always wanted to pursue.
No, that's good. Okay. So you want to go into a little bit of why did you decide to write this book?
Yeah, sure. So when I was going up the corporate ladder at Jefferies, and frankly, I had worked with lots of companies throughout my career, and I observed a very similar pattern across all these companies at Jefferies, at Goldman Sachs, at a lot of my clients, and that was there was a lot of diversity at the junior level. And I'm really talking about the last 15 years, frankly. 25 years, 30 years ago, it wasn't. But certainly in the last 15 or so years, there's definitely been more emphasis on diversity, and even more so now. But what I saw time and time again was that there was a lot of diversity at the entry level, a lot of people of color, a lot of women, a real big push to recruit at the entry level, but really no focus on grooming these people for senior management. Occasionally there might be a mentorship program, or there might be, in the larger companies, an emphasis on ERG groups or employee resource groups. But really, to a large extent, a lot of people are kind of left to fend for themselves. And I also saw through my own career that the stakes grew exponentially, particularly in industries where there was a lot of compensation at stake. And Wall Street, in many ways, is a crucible. There's a reputation that Wall Street has, which is it's a really tough place to work, and I will attest that it is. But Wall Street is not too dissimilar from other industries like Silicon Valley and Hollywood and Madison Avenue and management consulting, where as you rise the ranks and the compensation and the titles are exponentially higher, the stakes get higher. I see a lot of situations where things start to get really Machiavellian, things start to get much more political, and the rules of the game, frankly, change, and they're very fluid. And so, being a good dad, being a good tiger dad, I started to think about all the things that I had done in my career that I didn't learn at Penn. I went to Harvard Business School. I didn't learn at Harvard Business School. And I started to write some of the things that worked for me, things related to negotiating compensation, things like positioning myself for promotion, early promotion, things like how to conduct myself so that I make an impression to my boss, to my clients, to my employees. I started to write down a lot of the tips and tricks that worked for me during my career. And my intent was really just to share this with my two boys and share it with them probably as a graduation gift when they graduate from college, and give it to them and say, okay, sons, here you go. Here's what your old man learned the hard way. And hopefully you don't make the same mistakes I did, and this makes your life a little easier. And so that's really how it started. I like to joke it was like a 50-page, old man manifesto, kind of ramblings, a lot of bullet points, a lot of, diagrams. And what ended up happening was during the pandemic, a good friend of mine who was an author reached out and wanted to know what I was up to. And I mentioned this project that I've been working on for several years. And he said, you should share that, with literary agents, send it over to me. Let me take a look at it. And the whole thing kind of snowballed ultimately into a publishing deal that I signed with Wiley in December of 2020. And fundamentally, I really didn't have an intent to write a book, but I was convinced to do it because I felt that I could turn it into a charitable project. I felt that I could turn it into a situation where I could share my knowledge, not only with my boys, but frankly, anybody that feels disadvantaged in any way. And I felt that I could pledge as well to give all of the proceeds to charities, and particularly charities that are very near and dear and personal to me. And so that's really how this whole thing came about. I joke I'm kind of an accidental author. This is definitely was not my intent. But I signed the contract in December, and then I definitely did have a small moment of anxiety because I had to deliver 300 pages in 4 months, and so I was like, okay, I got to get to work here. But thankfully, I got it done, and the book is going to be published by Wiley in November. And so I'm excited to share my story and my tips and tricks with everyone.
Yeah. So on that note, could you give us one or two tips of the way of this Wall Street warrior?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me kind of give you an overarching view on how my book is structured and the way I wrote it. So it's really a 4-part book. Part 1 is all about getting in the game, getting a job, getting noticed, getting a client. But it's really all about like how do you win the deal, win the job. And I'd say that the content is primarily geared towards people that are earlier in their career, people that are trying to get a first job or trying to switch jobs. But it's really some of the tips and tricks that I learned in terms of winning clients and also getting a job. Then part 2 is really once you got your foot in the door, once you won the job, won the client, how do you progress? How do you make an impression? How do you do a good job so that you're scaling the corporate ladder and doing it ideally at an accelerated pace? And then part three is really that point where you can see the summit, you can see the brass ring. You're not there yet, but you're pretty close. And it's really probably the most dangerous part of the company to be at, because you're very expensive, but you're not the boss yet. You're not the partner. You're not the managing director. And frankly, there's a lot of people wondering, whether or not you belong, right? Your boss is probably wondering, are you going to take my job, right? Do I really want to help you if you're going to take my job? And then the people below you are looking at you going, I could do your job. I'm cheaper than you. I could do your job. And so part three is really all about, like, once you get really close, how do you capture the brass ring? What are some of the things that I did to get partner, to get managing director, to really ascend? And then part four is really reflective, and it's really about, now that you've accomplished all you want from a career standpoint, what about everything else? What about your legacy? What about your family? What about your brand? What about giving back? Philanthropy is a big part of my life. And so that's really the structure of the book, kind of a 4-part book where, I broke it down into 30 chapters. So they're easily digestible. Each chapter is less than 10 pages. And I wrote a book, frankly, that I wish I had at business school and in school, in that I start off every chapter with a cartoon because I wanted to always be a cartoonist. And now that I wrote my own book, I can be a cartoonist. So I have a cartoon before every chapter that kind of gives you a sense of what the chapter is about. And then I have bullet points, key takeaways at the end of every chapter. So you can look at any chapter, look at the cartoon, look at the, skip to the end, look at the takeaways, and decide whether or not that chapter is worth reading or not. And then every chapter is somewhat modular so that, you can decide, hey, I'm in the middle of compensation season, and I really want to get paid well this year. So I'm going to read Dave's chapter on, like, getting paid, right? Or, I got some big meetings coming up, and, the feedback from my boss has been kind of bad about how I'm doing in meetings. And so I'll read Dave's chapter on, like, what are some of the tricks he used, in meetings, and how did he make an impression? And so that's the overarching book. And then every tip or trick that I go through in my book really has the following structure, which is, I start with something that worked for me, real life, it got me paid more, it won me a client, et cetera. Then I try to validate it with not only my own experience, but I interview a lot of my friends who are very senior partners on Wall Street, or had a great career on Wall Street. And then third, I'm a big believer in human psychology and cognitive bias and behavioral economics. And so whenever possible, I try to validate that tactic by drawing upon research that's been done by Nobel Prize winning behavioral economists and psychologists like a Danny Kahneman or a Dan Ariely, people that have written award-winning books like Thinking Fast and Slow and Predictably Irrational. And so if I were to summarize, a lot of the tactics that I use, a lot of them are actually based on just understanding people and understanding the fact that people are not always rational. And in fact, people are highly emotional beings, and there are ways to use the irrationality of people to your advantage. So that's a little bit of a high level in terms of, how the overall book is structured. And one, and I'm happy to go into as many topics as you like, but one of the things that I constantly get asked is around compensation. What are some of your best pieces of advice as it relates to compensation? And what I will tell you, something that has worked really well for me and for many people I know, is not to bring up compensation towards the period when compensation is being discussed. So not bring it up for the first time, during bonus season or during salary, increase season, but really have a cadence around it. Drop some hints, talk about it as you're leading up to that period of time. And the best time, frankly, to do it are really two dimensions. One is when you've just done something great. It might actually be early in the year, but you closed a big deal, or you finished a big project, or you gave a speech in front of the company and everyone was like jazzed about, what you had to say. Those are great times to reach out to your boss or your manager, sit down with them and say, look, there's still a warm glow around you. There's a little bit of a halo around you. And you tell your boss, look, I love working here and I love my job, but I want to make sure that I get paid fairly. And I'm not here for the money, even though you might be. I'm not here for the money. I'm here for the holistic experience and the money. And you have in your power the ability to take money off the table. So I don't have to worry about it. So I can focus on the job at hand and do a great job. And that's kind of paraphrasing ultimately the communication. And frankly, I think a lot of times it actually turns out to be true. But I think if you deliver a message like that, right after you've done something great, then I guarantee you your boss or your manager is thinking, yeah, you're definitely value add, right? I can see that. I mean, I still feel the glow of what you just accomplished, and I'll make sure that I file that back in the recesses of my memory. And if you do that often enough, by the time that we're talking about compensation, the odds are quite high that your boss is taking care of you, or at least, bridging some of the gap so that you don't have to lobby as hard. And the reality is that plays very well in a social setting. So there's a lot of research that shows that when you're talking about specific topics in more of a social situation, when maybe your boss is relaxed, they're more likely to be empathetic. They're more likely to say, I don't look at Dave as just some expensive laptop, or expensive resource. I see him as a person, right? Because we're sitting next to each other, on the plane, maybe drinking some cocktails, or, we're having a dinner together and we're talking about not only his job, but, his family and his background. And so I would say that those are generally two of the major tips that I give people when they ask me about compensation. It's bring it early and often, but generally right after or around the proximity of something that you've done well. And then also, whenever possible, try to talk about these things in more of a relaxed social setting, because then it's more likely that your boss will see you as a person and not necessarily just a resource for the company.
So those are some good tips to say, keep feeding it along, remind them every once in a while what your worth is. That's a good thing.
Make it really clear to your boss that, unless you're a pure mercenary, the truth is that we do what we do, not just for money, we do it for a lot of reasons. But if the money is not good enough, it distracts from everything else. So I think it's really important to communicate expectations and say to your boss or your manager, look, I'm having a great time doing what I'm doing, and you have in your power to take the compensation question off the table. And so you need to do that so I can continue to do great work. Otherwise, I'm going to get distracted because I'm going to be worried about, am I getting underpaid? And even worse, am I getting screwed? Then all bets are off. Then there really does become a mercenary relationship. And no company wants that. Not in the war for talent. It's just too difficult to retain people if it's purely about money and you're constantly letting people down, your employees down by screwing them.
So I'm going to ask you, I know that philanthropy is important to you. So you talked about giving charity the proceeds from this book. You want to talk a little bit about the charities that you're going to help support?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for bringing that up. So getting a little bit more personal than I think I already have. I was actually born with a very severe birth difference, which was a bilateral cleft lip and palate. And I've only recently started talking about it because I frankly didn't want it to define me. But essentially, there were portions of my face and my palate that were not fused. So I was born with a big hole in the center of my face. And I underwent a lifetime of treatment. So I had treatment up until my sophomore year in college, where I had 11 surgeries and a lot of hospital and specialist treatment. And thankfully, everything worked out all right. And I've been blessed that I've been able to accomplish a lot of what I want to accomplish so far in life, despite the challenges. And it's a tough birth difference because you wear it on your face. And for a lot of us that are cleft affected, you grow up in a very challenging environment. People tease you, kids can be really mean. And for a lot of us, I don't think that there are as many sources of inspiration, frankly. I certainly didn't have any when I was growing up. I didn't meet another person who had any cleft until I was in my mid-20s. And so for a long time, I wondered if there were any successful people that had a cleft. And so I feel very strongly that another reason why I wrote this book was to be a tiny beacon, if you will, for people that have clefts, parents who have kids with clefts, and show them that, there is a path where things can actually work out okay. And hopefully I'm an example of that. And so one of the charities that I'm really excited about, that I've been helping for quite some time, is smiletrain.org. And essentially, they repair cleft kids and cleft babies all around the world. And they're able to do it in an incredible business model, if you will, where they train doctors around the world, and they leverage a lot of the local resources. So using a religious analogy, where if you give a man a fish, he eats for a day, but you teach a man a fish, he eats forever. That's very much the philosophy of Smile Train, where they try to use the charitable resources to train and help local medical professionals, so that, frankly, these people around the world are not subject to the healthcare costs that we are in the United States. And so I'm really excited about the work that Smile Train is doing. I think it's a highly efficient model. And so I'm giving a portion of the proceeds from my book. Actually, all the proceeds that go to me, so all the royalties go to me, are going to charity. I'm blessed. I don't need the profit from my book. And I really want to raise awareness of some of these charitable initiatives. So I'm giving all the proceeds to charities like Smile Train. And then I'm also, largely because of what's going on in my community, in the Asian American community, I'm also giving a portion of the proceeds to Asian American charities that are focused on getting more Asian American voices in media, as well as trying to stop the Asian hate that frankly continues in this country, despite the fact that I think mainstream media has moved on. There's still violence weekly against Asian Americans in this country. And so I'm trying to do my part to help provide resources for those organizations that are trying to stop it, or at least reduce it.
Okay. No, those sound very well. I read some about them on your website too. So I'm like, that was good. I think at this point, we're going to open it up to questions. And if Dave's okay with it, there's only 15 of us. If people want to unmute and ask questions, they can go ahead. Does that sound okay to you, Dave?
Yeah, that sounds great. But why don't you select them, because
all right, okay.
It isn't a chaotic mess.
I understand. So I see Giorgio's hand open or up. So Giorgio, go ahead and ask your question.
Hey, Dave, thank you very much for your presentation. You're the epitome of Tau Beta Pi's exemplary character. So I salute you.
Thank you.
One of my buddies at fellow alumni always have a glass of wine at these presentations. It makes it enjoyable. There's so much to ask you, but let me just maybe start off with one question. I do find it interesting, your background being in Hong Kong. Do you attribute, anything from that time that you spent in Hong Kong to your accomplishments today?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't talk too much about this, but it was an amazing time to be in Hong Kong. I grew up in Hong Kong in the 70s and 80s, and it is identical to what a lot of people experience in the major cities in mainland China today. where we were seeing skyscrapers going up weekly. The city was really a small entry pot when I moved there as a kid. And then really, I was there during the whole Asian tiger period where Hong Kong skyrocketed, where the per capita, GDP was one of the highest, if not the highest in Asia, maybe relative only to Tokyo. And so it was an amazing experience. And it really had a huge impact on me, and even to this day, which is I saw the power of unbridled capitalism at a young age. There was an entrepreneur. There's entrepreneurs everywhere there. Everybody's an entrepreneur, and the environment is such that it is the ultimate laissez-faire society, where you get what you make. You keep what you make. It's a flat tax. There's no capital gain. But that also means that there's no help from the government, zero. And so the wealth inequality in Hong Kong is staggering. It is just unbelievable, the cost of housing there. I remember as a kid, we lived in, a middle-class neighborhood. And recently, 30 years later, or 35 years later, there was an apartment across the street from us that was merged with several other penthouses. So it became a mega penthouse. I think it was probably, at the end of the day, maybe 5 or 6 bedroom apartment, at the top of a building. And it recently sold a couple of years ago for $100 million US. So you just have amazing wealth there. And people are buying this stuff like cash, like no financing. But then the flip side is Hong Kong, unfortunately, is very famous for coffin hotels and coffin apartments. And they're called that because they're literally the size of a coffin. And a lot of people in Hong Kong live that way because if you don't work for a multinational, if you're not a very successful entrepreneur, then you're working as a light manufacturer, laborer, or you're working in a very low-end white-collar job. And again, it's an environment where there's really no support given by the government. And so I saw that as a really young age. I saw the unbridled power of capitalism and what one could do if left to their own devices with their own business idea. And my father was an entrepreneur, so I saw what he was able to do. But I also saw the dark side of it. And so a big part of my life now is focused on philanthropy. I've been blessed. I have a couple, skills that I'm pretty good at. I'm good at raising money. I'm good at building companies. I'm good at selling companies. And I think that I have an obligation to help other people who frankly aren't good at that stuff and maybe are being left behind in what we're seeing in our country. And so, yes, absolutely. My experience in Hong Kong definitely had a huge impact on me and helped me really appreciate this country a lot more. I think that's another thing. Like, I don't think people in America really appreciate how great it is here. In many ways, you got to leave here to appreciate it. But I can tell you right now, people in Hong Kong with the clampdown on freedom for the last couple of years, it's a very tough time to be someone living in Hong Kong because not only do you not have a lot of the benefits unless you're a powerful family or a very successful entrepreneur, not only do you not have the economic benefit and you're likely being left behind, but all of the political freedoms that Hong Kong people enjoyed before 1997, so before the handover, which was the period I was there. I was there during the British government. All those freedoms are gone. And so I think it's a very tough time for them. And I think we take a lot of that for granted here. But, if they ever went away, I think we'd really appreciate how great some of the things are here.
All right. The next question, Colin has his hand raised. Go ahead, Colin.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Dave. I've been really looking forward to this and looking forward to your book. Especially I think, well, even for myself, but I think, our Tau Beta Pi membership perhaps coming into their careers with full of idealism and, not understanding that there is a game to be played, so to speak, in corporate world. But I don't know, so many things. Yeah, I'd love to talk to you about and ask you about, but kind of specific when you were talking about people are not always rational, they're emotional, and you can use their irrationality to your advantage, I think you said. I'm wondering if either in your career experience or when writing your book, you had any challenges with the integrity side of how to do, how to use the reality to your advantage.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So in my book, and I say this to everyone that I mentor, don't ever do anything illegal, and definitely don't do anything unethical, because ultimately it comes back and bites you. But I will say that some of the most successful and most powerful people I know are highly unethical, and some commit, illegal acts. They just don't get caught. I went to business school at Harvard, and 3 of my classmates were indicted. And before they were indicted, they were making hundreds of millions of dollars. And so I often think about that, and I think about my career where I've encountered lots of people who make orders of magnitude, 10, 100 times more money than I ever made. But they do it not necessarily by playing by the rules. And I'm at peace with that because I don't ever want to not be able to sleep at night. But I know that I'm leaving money on the table. And I think you just have to come to terms with that unfortunately, this is not a fair world. There are people out there who there's definitely people that commit unethical acts all the time, lie, cheat, and then there's a lot of people who commit illegal acts, and once in a while those people get caught. But the police, the SEC, they can't catch everybody. And so it's something that I think you have to come to terms with. Now, I never had a problem at work or, with my clients. If I ever saw anything illegal or definitely, unethical, I would call it out, because I certainly don't want that to impugn, my reputation, or frankly, the worst case scenario is to get drawn into it. So I certainly made sure that if I ever saw anything like that, I would call it out. But the ethical boundary is tough. Like illegal acts are pretty black and white, a lot of times. But unethical acts are tough because one person's ethics, one person's ethical boundary is very different from another person's, particularly, cultural. And I'll give you a perfect example. When I was at Jefferies, I built up our China practice. So I spent a lot of time, not only in the United States covering US internet companies, but I covered a lot of Chinese internet companies as well. And one of the competitors I had, which was a craw on my side, was JP Morgan. And JP Morgan would blow me out of the water every time. And I always knew something fishy was going on, but I could never prove it. And a couple of my VC friends and entrepreneurs over there would hint at me and go like, look, you can't win against these guys. You're not doing what they're doing. And I said, well, what are they doing? And they're like, well, I don't know what they're doing. And then fast forward many years later, my primary competitor over there was basically found guilty by the SEC and banned by the industry because JP Morgan had been running something called the Sons and Daughter Program, where essentially what they were doing was they were hiring unqualified kids of CEOs in China to be interns and analysts at JP Morgan and paying them a lot of money. The starting compensation in investment banks, is generally around 6 figures. So they're paying these kids who don't know how to do anything to work at JP Morgan so that their dad or their mom gives them the IPO. And so I could never prove it, but apparently when all this came out, JP Morgan had been doing it for years. And I guarantee you, JP Morgan senior management knew about it. I guarantee you. But I guarantee you as well that they justified it by saying, well, China's different, right? Things are done differently in China. There's this notion of guanxi, where it's all about relationships, right? And unfortunately, guanxi can quickly slippery slope into cronyism and nepotism. And that's ultimately what happened. So yeah, I wish I had a better answer for you, but
that was awesome.
I'm a realist, and unfortunately that's the way the world works. And I think that you just have to be at peace with the fact that there will always be people that make more money than you, that are more powerful, have a bigger title, and some of them got there through illicit means. But I never advocate doing any of that stuff because life's too short and I like to sleep well at night.
That was awesome. Thank you, Dave.
Thanks, Colin. The next hand up that I see is Anthony. Go ahead, Anthony.
Hi, Dave. This is Anthony with the Tampa Bay Alumni Chapter. I'm really looking forward to your book. I just pre-ordered it.
Oh, thank you.
My question is, during your time as a financial banker, did you ever thought like you needed a change? If not, how did you stay motivated to be on top of your game?
Yeah, so definitely, you know, life is really weird. You know, I would say that at the end of every year, I really thought long and hard about whether I wanted to stay or not. And there are confidants of mine who are very close friends, and they would be the pillows that I would cry on. And some of them will tell you that as long as they knew me, I was quitting every year. So I definitely think that there were times where I really wanted to evaluate whether I wanted to continue to do this. But I think I stayed for a couple of reasons. One is that the opportunity continued to grow as I stayed there. Like I said, I joined the firm when it was really small and it grew. And one of the great things about joining growing companies is that there's more than enough work to do and not enough people in a growing company. And so I was able to spread my wings and do lots of different things. So as I progressed from the traditional analyst to associate to vice president to senior vice president to managing director, as I got more senior, I was able to do lots of different things. And, you know, I started my career doing securitizations. And for those of you that aren't familiar with that, I highly recommend the movie The Big Short. That is one of the best movies that describes in layman's terms what securitization is all about and how it almost destroyed the world. So I started my career doing securitizations, and then I did IPOs, M&A. But as I got more senior, I really started to branch out and become a specialist in other areas. So I became a specialist in capital markets and learning about the public markets and equity markets really well. And then I started to focus on an industry, and I believed, you know, and this was obviously among you guys is an obvious bet, but I believed that the internet was going to be big. And so I decided that I was going to put all my energy in internet and not focus on other industries that I had been spending some time on, like alternative energy and consumer. I really focused on internet. And I became a black belt in certain subsegments of the internet space. And that really is what motivated me to stay. It was that it wasn't the functional elements of the job that I was learning. I will say that, you know, I mastered, you know, a lot of the functional elements of being a banker probably in my early 30s, late 20s, early 30s. So I knew how to do an M&A deal. I knew how to take companies public. I knew how to do bonds. I knew how to do securitizations. The functional elements I had already mastered by then. But what really motivated me from my 30s onward up until my my early 40s was really learning about the industry and spending time with all these crazy companies in the internet space. And that's really what kept me going. It was more learning by the industry subsector and less by the functional elements of the job. And that's, I think, one of the great things about Wall Street and other businesses where you are a client focused is that once you kind of exhaust the functional elements of the job where you don't feel you're really learning anymore because you know how to do a strategic plan, you know how to do a comp plan, you know how to do sales analysis, you know how to do models, you know how to do, you know, financing. I think where service industries benefit is if you can go deep in an industry that you find you personally find quite interesting, then that's another vector through which you can grow. And for me, that was the internet space. And so that kept me coming because there was never a dull moment in the internet space. You know, it started off with kind of client software, then you know, portals, then search, and then you fast forward, you know, the rise of the ad networks, social media, right? There was always something new coming along, and continues to be that way in the tech world. And so that's really what kind of kept me in and kept drawing me back to the job. But ultimately, when I hit my early 40s, I had actually saved every bonus check I ever made, and I had committed to myself that I wanted to be able to walk away on top. I wanted to be able to walk away a little bit like Michael Jordan the first time, not the Chicago Bull Michael Jordan, not the Washington Wizards Michael Jordan, but I wanted to be a little bit like the Chicago Bull Michael Jordan, where I could walk out on my own terms. And so when I hit my early 40s, I decided that my wife and I really wanted to have a family, and I didn't want to be a cliche absentee dad. And so I decided that that wasn't frankly sustainable with the lifestyle of an investment banker in a highly competitive industry where I was working, 80 to 120 hours a week. And so I decided that would be a good time for me to exit stage right. And so that's what I did. It took a while to get out of there. Wall Street is a little bit like the mafia. You don't leave the mafia, they leave you. So it took a full almost 2.5, 3 years before I ultimately left the firm. But I don't have any regrets because I had a great career, made a lot of friends, learned a lot, and was able to then have a second act, if you will, by doing other things.
Thank you, Dave. That's a great answer. It's very inspiring.
Thank you.
Good questions. Good questions. Anybody have any other ones? Otherwise, I'll go ahead. Oh, Giorgio's got another hand up. Go ahead, Giorgio.
Tricia, if you want to go right ahead, ladies first.
Oh, I would say go ahead.
Are you sure? All right.
Yes, go ahead, Giorgio.
So Dave, I appreciate the topic there of your charities in particular, and it's a difficult subject to talk about some of these scenarios that we face, but I think if there's anything that I was caught off guard a little bit with was working at very reputable places and still experiencing some type of defamation, discrimination, and things like that. So, I do find it interesting to hear people's experiences, with their, situation. You having worked in Wall Street, I assume, there are certain stories that you might want to share with us in terms of, obviously this is being recorded, of course, but things that we maybe can learn from you in terms of your experiences of things that ideally, you wish you didn't experience, or perhaps it made you a better person.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many situations where if I viewed the world as black and white, then I was fully in my right to go, flip a handle and go nuclear. And I think a lot of it was driven by ignorance and not really by malicious intent. But there were definitely situations where it was driven by malicious intent. I remember very distinctly, there was a situation where I was already a managing director. So I was a junior managing director. So I was a young managing director. And in investment banks, that's a big deal. You have the power to sign the firm. You have the power to bind the firm. And it's really only at that managing director level. So I was already given a lot of authority by the firm, and I wasn't just some junior knucklehead. I was a partner, if you will, in the firm. And there was a client that we were meeting, and I was tag teaming this meeting with another managing director who was more senior than me. He was ahead of me in a few years. And I had actually invited him to the meeting because I wanted to be a good team player, because he was in a related area, and so it was important that both of us be in the meeting to show the client that, hey, you don't just have an internet guy here, you also have another person that covers a tangential area, right? And so I invited him, frankly, as courtesy, and he was really late to the meeting. I mean, really late. We were. I think ultimately he was about half an hour late. And this is a CEO of a hot company. Like, he's given us 1 hour and he can meet with any investment bank he wants, right? And so I'm doing a little tap dance and I'm talking about the firm, and I'm doing a lot of traditional chit chat, basically biding time so that my partner has an opportunity to come in and we don't look like, frankly, chumps and disorganized. And my partner finally showed up, and the CEO client looked at him and goes like, dude, we've been waiting here for like 30 minutes. Where the hell have you been? And this CEO client is a young guy. He's very brash. He doesn't care, right? He's like, look, I'm the cat's meow. I'm going to say whatever I want because you guys want my business. And my partner looks at the CEO and goes, oh, I'm very sorry. I didn't know that this meeting was starting at that time. David probably fucked it up. And he looked at me and I looked at him. I'm like, what are you talking about? But I didn't say this, but I was giving him the what are you talking about look. And he comes over and he slaps me in the back of my head so hard that my teeth rattle. And I was literally shocked. I'm like, I don't even know what to do here. Like, this is so weird. And the CEO client looks at both of us and he's like, what is going on here? Right? I mean, this is very strange. And so I could have made a huge stink out of it, right? And I was fully in my rights. But I wanted that meeting to be over. And I knew once my partner did that, like, it was over. There's no way this company's going to hire us. So I just thanked the CEO for coming. And I said, look, I really apologize. There was a mix up in the scheduling. It might've been my fault. I don't think it was, but I thought it might've been my fault. And then we moved on. And then I talked to my partner separately. I said, look, what you did was uncalled for. I don't know what you did, why you hit me. That's crazy. But we're just going to forget about this. And we're going to forget this ever happened and move on. And from that point onward, I never invited him to any meeting. I never worked with him. And thank God, a couple of years later, he was fired from the firm. But that's an example of many that I've experienced, frankly, in my career. Maybe not exactly as strange as that, but I could easily have gone nuclear. But I decided that, frankly, I didn't necessarily want to, win the battle and lose the war. And I know that, there's probably some people who listen to this and go like, oh, you should have like taken the guy behind the shed. But it's just not my personality. And ultimately, frankly, I was really shocked that it even happened. But I felt that there was a longer game I wanted to play here. And so I decided to move on. So that's one example. I have lots of those, but that's one example of where, I decided to try to win the long game and not necessarily take on the short game and potentially lose and create like a whole, firestorm of issues.
That is a good example. Not nice, but a good example. All right. We'll take one more question right now before I stop recording. But Robert, you have your hand up?
Yes, as a somebody that's had their career in engineering education, and you have a dual degree in with engineering. Was the engineering education any use to you in your career?
Yeah, it was really, really helpful on a lot of dimensions. So when I was a young investment banker, one of the things that differentiated me big time from the other investment bankers was I could program. And when I first started working at Jefferies, we did securitizations using a COBOL mainframe system. And so being able to program gave me a huge advantage and frankly made me the number one choice to work on securitization deals. And also, I think, gave the impression that I could be a Swiss Army knife, that, with Dave, you can get all the, Excel jockey expertise and the PowerPoint god expertise, but with him too, like he can also program and he can do some other stuff that none of the other guys can do. And certainly, I think made a difference in compensation and promotional track. And then when I became a senior banker or was trying to become a managing director, my knowledge of technology was a big advantage too. I definitely could talk the talk with a lot of entrepreneurs. And when I was trying to carve out my own personal reputation in the internet space, what I realized was that every firm kind of put their A team on the internet because it was, so highly branded. There was so many companies that were growing, and it would really become a branding event for an investment bank if you were associated with, a Yahoo, a Google, AOL, you name it. And so I still went for those opportunities, but we didn't have the sweatshirt of a firm like a Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley, so we lost more than we won. But in order for me to make sure that I could be productive and build a practice, I decided to go really deep in a subsector of the internet space, which was online advertising. And I think my background in engineering helped me learn that space a lot faster than most. And when I was at kind of my peak reputation-wise, within Silicon Valley, a lot of my clients used to call me Mr. Ad Tech. And they used to tell me that nobody knows this space better than you. And I think a large part of it was because of my background in engineering. And then in many ways, the engineering background is a mindset and a framework for thinking that is like the gift that keeps on giving. And when I left Wall Street and I became an entrepreneur, that really helped me a lot when I was building my own technology company, as well as investing and sitting on the boards of technology companies, because I could understand, how they were doing what they were doing. I certainly wasn't, and I'm not at a level now where I can, code up an app. I probably could if I really dedicated myself to it. But understanding like the challenges of building a product, whether that be a website, an app, a hardware product, like these are all things that I'm a pretty quick study, and I attribute that to my engineering background.
Okay, we're approaching the end of the hour. We do have one thing that I want to add to chat. Dave is offering everyone a chance to win an autographed copy of the book at this website. I will send it out in the email to the people who are on tonight too, so they can have that in case they don't get it out of the chat. So, and then we'll wrap up now, but we'll stay around for a few questions afterwards after recording. But Dave, would you like to say any parting comments before I turn off the recording?
I just want to thank you, Tricia, for helping to set this up. I'm a big fan of Tau Beta Pi. I've really enjoyed being on the Trust Advisory Committee, helping invest our endowment and making sure that we have funds for scholarships and for other programs. So I'm a really big fan of the organization and what we're doing. And I'm really happy that I had an opportunity to share my story and my project here. And I'm hopeful that, all of you got a little something out of this, and feel free to reach out to me anytime. I'm on LinkedIn, social media. Tricia, you can put all my contacts up there. I'm happy to help. I'm definitely in a mode now where, I enjoy helping people. And so, again, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share my story.
No, that's good. And I thank everyone for coming too. And thank you, Dave, for speaking tonight. It was very good. Good to hear more about you and your background and your passions and your career path too. I think that was very good for lots of people. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording right now.